Good morning and welcome to our discussion about the future of audit quality. I'm Tom Quadden with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm looking forward to this discussion today. Financial reports and corporate disclosures are critical communications vehicles that allow businesses to raise capital and for investors to decide what firms to invest in or not invest in. The audit and assurance work, as well as internal controls, are important to create appropriate levels of certainty in the information provided. Those systems are key to help businesses to grow from small to large. Since the passage of Sarbanes-Oxley, or SOX for short, restatements have fallen and some overseas, such as the UK and Germany, are looking to the American system as a path forward to improving audit quality. Legislative requirements, the regulatory implementation of SOX, the creation of the PCAOB have been important, but other developments get overlooked. Auditors no longer pore over ledger books. Instead, they are using cutting-edge technologies to strengthen the audit and provide investors with more and higher quality information. Our discussion today, which has many distinguished speakers, seeks to look at both the technological and policy developments that has allowed audit quality to improve in an ever-changing world. At the outset, I'd like to give a big thank you to our partners, the Center for Audit Quality, in sponsoring this event today, and also to all of our distinguished speakers. I am pleased to be joined by Kelly Greer, CEO of EY and chair of the CAQ board. Kelly has been at EY for over 30 years and knows these issues better than anyone and is a staunch advocate to continue improving the audit. Kelly, let me turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Tom, and thank you for having me and for the opportunity to share my perspective on the criticality of our profession, both now and in the future, as well as its importance in promoting trust and confidence in our capital markets. For the past 2 years, I've had the honor of serving as the chair of the governing board for the Center for Audit Quality, which is an organization created after the Sarbanes-Oxley Act by the profession, which is dedicated to enhancing investor confidence and public trust in the capital markets, much like the financial statement audit itself. It has been an honor to represent the profession, engaging with regulators, standard setters, audit committee chairs, and investors to focus not only on the strengths of the audit profession, but also to drive continuous improvement in audit quality and to meet the evolving needs of investors and others. Looking back at the past 18 months, despite the uncertainty in the economy and unprecedented disruption in business operations, companies and boards have continued to deliver transparent financial reporting. Audit teams have risen to the challenge and evolved, fulfilling their commitment to deliver high-quality audits and serve the public interest, which is at the heart of our responsibilities as auditors. And the profession has remained very steadfast and focused on investing in the future as well. The United States has the largest, most liquid, and transparent capital markets in the world, which offer investors of all types the opportunity to provide for their families, to save for college, to secure their retirement, and to build toward their aspirations. High-quality, independent audits are the bedrock of those markets. So as the world works to stabilize and recover from the pandemic and the economic fallout associated with it, we have an incredibly important role to play in building trust and confidence in financial reporting. So how will we achieve that? First and foremost, by leading with purpose. Since the passage of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act nearly 20 years ago, the U.S. capital markets have benefited from strong, coordinated regulatory standards and effective independent oversight by both audit committees and the PCAOB. SOX reshaped corporate oversight and governance in the U.S., and the law is recognized around the globe for its effectiveness in promoting trusted financial reporting and high levels of audit quality. It established a new accountability framework for public company auditing, while at the same time strengthening the very principles our profession is built on: independence, professional skepticism, and personal integrity. And that's critically important because again and again, we see that having a strong culture grounded in values is instrumental in driving sustainable audit quality improvement. We at EY and so many others in the profession have been able to take the challenges of the past 18 months head on to pivot to a fully remote paradigm while also addressing the complexity of the COVID-19 environment for our people and our clients. We were able to do this because our common purpose inspires us to move forward together and keep us focused on our highest priority, which is executing high quality audits. Second, by accelerating the digital transformation in the profession. For every company in every industry, digital transformation is at the top of the agenda, and the audit profession is no exception. New technologies are revolutionizing where and how we work and the work itself. A significant driver of audit quality today is the adoption of a data-driven audit approach. In digitizing the audit, we're able to analyze full populations of data expeditiously, and that has transformed how we approach the planning, execution, and conclusion elements of the audit process. As firms continue to invest in new technologies to advance audit quality, we're also working through the CAQ to engage with regulators and standard setters to share how technology is supporting and can further enhance audit quality. Third, by investing in our people and paving the way for the next generation. The past 18 months have highlighted the resilience of our people and the importance of investing in skills, professional development, recruiting, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Audit quality is only as strong as the teams executing that work every day. And data is only beneficial if challenged and analyzed by auditors who exercise foundational skills such as judgment, objectivity, and skepticism. That's why building diverse teams across all dimensions of diversity has never been more critical to the work that we do. Diverse teams are more innovative and drive audit quality by leveraging a range of perspectives and competencies to reach better decisions. Equally important is investing in learning and growth opportunities for our people, as well as in the technology that supports their work. Rethinking the pathway into the profession is also an important step in supporting the future generations to help students meet their CPA requirements while also accelerating the start of their career. By making the profession more relevant, removing barriers to make it more accessible and more affordable, we'll be able to attract and grow the next generation of transformative leaders for the benefit of our profession and people and for all of our stakeholders. Today, individuals seek out organizations whose values align with their own personal values. So we need to be very explicit about what the profession stands for: trust, transparency, and more. The CAQ's Talent Initiative is also shining a light on the tremendous opportunities the profession offers younger generations to make an impact on the economy and their communities. A key part of these efforts is ensuring that this is an inclusive profession, and the CAQ is actively working with its member firms like EY to examine ways to increase minority access to the profession. I am approaching the future with a mix of healthy optimism and an auditor's skepticism. To earn and secure trust and continue to prioritize quality in an increasingly complex world, we must build on the strong foundation and fundamentals of audit, including the regulatory framework established by SOX. We need to take advantage of every tool at our disposal to drive continuous improvement. And we need to continue to challenge ourselves to raise our own bar in executing high quality audits. We owe it to each other and to our stakeholders to do whatever it takes to reimagine the path forward to sustainable audit quality built on a strong foundation of independence and objectivity. Simply put, you don't earn trust by telling people you're trustworthy. You earn it by proving it every day. And with that, I thank you again and turn it back to Tom.
Kelly, thank you very much for those remarks. We appreciate your leadership for the profession and on these very important issues. I'd like to welcome aboard our distinguished panel here today. And we really hit a trifecta with these speakers because, as you're going to hear with these introductions, we are covering the entire waterfront that you possibly could in terms of financial reporting. So first, I would like to introduce Wes Bricker, who's currently the vice chair at PwC. Wes was also a former chief accountant at the SEC. I'd also like to introduce Kathy Waller, who has recently retired as the CFO of Coca-Cola and is now the audit committee chair for Beyond Meat. And last but not least is Jeff Mahoney, general counsel with the Council of Institutional Investors and a leader in the investor world, but previously was also counsel to FASB and the Financial Accounting Foundation, and a very important standard setter in this area. So all of you, welcome and appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much, Tom.
Let me ask the three of you a question to start us off. And Jeff, we'll start with you. Jeff, we'll start with you on this. But we've had 90 years of policy evolution related to the audit. So we had in 34, we had the passage of the Securities and Exchange Act. We had the creation of FASB. In 1973, we had the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act passed in 1977. And in 2002, obviously, we had the passage of Sarbanes-Oxley following the Enron and WorldCom scandals. Jeff, let's start with you. What do you see the impact of SOX being?
So, Tom, CII's membership-approved policies reflect the view, excuse me, reflect the view that Sarbanes-Oxley bolstered the transparency, the independence, the oversight, and the accountability of the audit process. Those same CII policies, however, also indicate that the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board should remain vigilant in their oversight of the audit profession, and that continued reforms may be necessary to ensure that the pillars of transparency, independence, accountability, and oversight remain solidly in place.
Great. So Wes, let me turn to you. Obviously, you've had a role both as a regulator, but now vice chair of PwC. So you've sort of seen it from both sides. What's your opinion?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's a great question, and maybe just building on what Jeff said, the audit occurs in a context of a broader process. So if we look backward at SOX, what SOX did, it added some provisions which increased the demand for higher quality audit. Two examples of that: it increased audit committee independence, the responsibilities and the expertise. Audit committees are buyers of audit services under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and that was a real improvement. But it also improved management accountability and their responsibility for documenting, testing, and assessing internal controls, as just one example. Those are all examples of where Sarbanes-Oxley increased the demand for higher audit quality. But then SOX also increased the requirements for audits, and that was a good step forward as well. Prominent example is Section 404B, which dealt with internal controls and requires for many companies, not all, but many companies, to have an audit of the internal control over financial reporting. And as we see from a variety of surveys, one survey, for example, identified that auditors detect 84% of internal control weaknesses that are disclosed as material weaknesses. So we can see requirements for audit and its impact in the marketplace. So that's where we've been in the past. Going forward, though, Tom, what I see is the importance of continuing to get it right, and that takes everyone. That takes, as Jeff pointed out, the regulatory process. It takes the marketplace, audit committees, investors, auditors. It takes everyone to really get this right. And there are big questions going forward around relevance and how to continue it to advance. So, Tom, those are a couple of things that I've seen from Sarbanes-Oxley and then pointing forward.
Kathy, where do you land on this? You're muted, Kathy.
When SOX started, I was chief of internal audit at Coca-Cola, And, it was great because everybody was focused on the need to opine on internal controls and the effectiveness of internal controls. So as a chief of internal audit, that was incredibly helpful. And then as time has gone on, SOX has, become kind of all consuming, if you will. And I feel like the question, that was just raised about relevance may in fact be the case, because the businesses have changed, things are going on. There are other things that are coming online that are equally important that we also need to make sure that our audit teams are taking a look at and that our companies are focused on, at least the controls around them. So, one being the environment that we've just been in, this hybrid environment or this virtual work environment, gives me some concerns about how we're going to make sure that our controls continue to be as effective, especially with this massive turnover that our companies seem to be experiencing. So I think that it was absolutely great. It did what it was supposed to do. I think there's some opportunity now to expand and focus on other things as well. And I think we need to also be vigilant and make sure that what we set out to do, we are still doing, because there's such massive change in all of our environments right now.
So Kathy, if we can maybe drill down just a little bit further in your current role as an audit committee chair, obviously Sarbanes-Oxley was very transformative for audit committees, right? And for their role in overseeing a company. How do you see the SOX process having worked out with audit committees, and how is it that you sort of look at this from your position now?
The SOX process?
Yes.
Well, so obviously we were all educated around the requirements of SOX, and that stands true to this day. So, given the audit committee that I chair, and I'm on two others, we've got this. The process is largely kind of the same in terms of you're setting up to understand the coverage, and then making sure that not only you have that coverage, but at the end of the day, everybody's done the right thing so that you can say your internal controls are effective. Again, the process hasn't changed. And that is why I believe the question of relevance is a good one, because maybe there should be some things that we should tweak or change to just given our environment, which concerns us, as audit committee members and me as an audit committee chair, just to make sure that we are staying on top of things to make sure that the process is still as robust as it was when we first set it up.
So Wes, if I can maybe ask you, first off, if you have any reaction to what Kathy was talking about. And one thing I just wanted to probe a little bit as well is that, after Sarbanes-Oxley passed, for a while, there was some noise within the system, right? In different parts of the system around internal controls, which we thought was, I agree with all of you. We took the position of that was a very important development, but there were some minor changes that the SEC made that I think has taken care of that noise, but have really provided for a strong system to remain in place. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Just going back to Kathy's point, I couldn't agree more. It's such an important point around the responsibility that we all have to continue to stay relevant, to continue to address the mandate that investors and other stakeholders count on us to serve, whether it's someone sitting in an audit chair or audit committee chair or even management. Tom, on the question of internal controls and how that's been reshaped over time, I think one of the real important points of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was that it really benefited investors and other stakeholders by bolstering transparency in the financial reporting process, but it also reinforced the importance of tone at the very top and culture. And it did that by reinforcing the role of the audit committee, the role of management, having certifications on the accuracy of financial reports, certifications on the effectiveness of the control system, and then an outside look by an auditor with disclosures that follow from that. It's that point about tone at the top and culture that I think is also one for us to continue to focus on as we go forward as well. And I think Kathy was making this point so well that as we think about the ways we work, the impact of the pandemic on how we work, how we stay safe while we work, whether that's in office or in a virtual setting, culture and the human side of auditing, the ability to challenge, the ability to understand different dimensions of effectiveness, to assess risk and design the right test, all of that comes together in the context of communication and culture within the audit firm and communication with the audit committee who has engaged the audit firm. And I do think that's an area for us to continue to focus on as we move forward, Tom.
Jeff, if, you are a very important voice within the investor community, and obviously this information, these reports are really critical for your members to really determine, how they're going to make investment decisions and other governance decisions as well. How have you seen it play out from the investor's point of view?
Well, Tom, I'm in wild agreement with everything that's been said so far about SOX. CII and many investors firmly believe that SOX did make some real positive contributions to the culture and the behavior at publicly traded companies. And it just mentioned two examples, one that's already been referred to. First, that many investors agree that the officer certification requirements in SOX, even though those are sometimes challenged in litigation by certifying officers, those requirements, I believe, increased the level of personal responsibility of many company officers with respect to the quality of their company's financial reports. And second, the one that's been mentioned and that I agree with is that the internal control requirements of SOX, including 404B, has, in my view, improved the reliability of companies' internal control disclosures to investors and the public, and the overall quality of financial reporting.
Hey, Kathy, one last question on this point, and then I want to move on. But you talked about the importance of Sarbanes-Oxley from your vantage point, right? With your career, and Wes talked a lot about the tone from the top and the culture and all that. From your point of view, working in a public company, how did you see Sarbanes-Oxley, changing that culture, and was it a positive development?
Oh my goodness, yeah, it certainly did change. So it was a good culture to begin with. The change was that the focus became on ensuring that everybody was aware and that internal controls were effective, which meant education. And so we were able to educate anybody that had a relatively senior role and up in the organization was well educated. They knew exactly what they needed to do. They understood the certifications. They understood what it meant to certify and that what was on the line. So from my perspective, it took a great culture to begin with, and enhanced it because people were more aware and they were certainly more focused on getting to that appropriate disclosure at the end.
So I want to move on to technology, right? Because I think there's a lack of understanding outside of the people who may be within the circle of just the role that technology plays now, right? And I alluded to this in my opening remarks, but we don't have auditors, right? With green eye shades on and looking at ledgers now and all that stuff. I mean, technology is a big player here, and I probably have mentioned this to you all before, but we were very, very involved in the lease accounting standard, right? Because that was companies have leases from everything from copiers to airplanes, right? And those were all going on the balance sheets. And we think FASB did a very good job in getting that closer to right than, let's say, where the IASB ended up. But as that was being implemented, I visited an audit firm, and they said, hey, what has been critical for us in terms of bringing the lease accounting standard online is machine learning, right? So here you have technology being such an important tool for the audit and for financial reporting. So Wes, can you talk a little bit about how that has developed, and Kathy and Jeff, if you can maybe follow on with that?
Sure.
Yeah, Tom, it's a great example. And in that example with lease accounting, the lease accounting, which is prepared by management within companies, technology is an enabler to really accumulate information and get it into the financial accounting system, rather than maybe in someone's desk drawer. It might be in an operational system. But in order for it to be communicated to investors, and investors really wanted and needed to have a better sense of lease obligations and in the activity flowing through leasing accounts, it had to start with companies. And that's where the big technology solutions were relevant. And to your point, it enabled us to step forward with much better reporting for lease obligations. But then the next question is, how do we audit it? What technology do auditors have to test the same trail of transactions, but also to identify items of relevant interest? As an audit firm like PwC, but this is true of many others as well, we invest heavily in technology so that we're able to test what management is doing in their core systems as well. Machine learning is one example, scanning contracts, understanding the key terms within those contracts, how it lines up with the accounting literature as we're evaluating and adding confidence to the reporting within financial statements and those disclosures. But as an audit firm, what we're also doing is it really starts with data. As a firm, PwC has invested heavily in this, starting with data to make sure that we're analyzing full populations where it's relevant and where it's appropriate. It's a little bit like when the tide goes out and you see everything on the ocean floor. Like, you can see everything on the ocean floor, perhaps by sampling, and that's a relevant technique. But if you can take all of the water out, or if you can look at all of the transactions within your system, you can not only better identify risk and conduct a risk assessment, but you can also better understand the contours. What's the nature of the activity? What should we focus on? What should we be communicating about, either to management providing feedback, or to the audit committee, or to stakeholders through our audit report? So technology is central to the progress that we're making, both on the preparer side, the leasing example, but also on the way we test and the effectiveness of audits, Tom.
Kathy?
Companies have been, when I was chief of internal audit, we were talking about the need for more technology, and the fact that technology would help us maintain the quality of the audit, while at the same time allowing people to travel less to get to certain locations. We were in 107 countries around the world. It would maintain that quality and reduce the time that management had to spend preparing documents, because people would have access to all the documents. They wouldn't have to, all the information, all the data. They wouldn't have to have specific documents prepared for them. So we knew technology was going to make a big difference in the way we control. We had the audit, we worked through the audit and the cost of the audit, and maintain the quality. So, fast forward, we got here, maybe not the way we all wanted to get here, but we got here, and it's going to continue over time. But thank goodness we got here, because we would not have been able to, given the virtual environment we all had to work in, we would not have been able to get our audits done and attest to our controls had we not had this technology available to us. So it's like, it converged, and now we have it, and it's going to continue to grow, and it's a good thing. It's a great thing.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts?
Yes, Tom, I agree. It's a great thing. CII has been a big supporter of using new technologies to improve both the quality and the accessibility of information that investors use to make investment and proxy voting decisions. We have and we continue to publicly support the SEC and the PCAOB in monitoring the development and implementation of new technologies used by the audit profession, and we rely on them, the SEC and the PCAOB, to analyze the implications of those new technologies, particularly with respect to audit quality, and to respond accordingly when appropriate and in the interest of investors.
So, if I can maybe drill down a little bit further with the point that Kathy raised, right? I mean, when Sarbanes-Oxley passed, right, we were still sort of at the beginning of the information age, right? It was 2002, right? And, there are different technologies beginning to come online. And I fully agree with Kathy, just from, the discussions we have with our member, interactions we've had with our members, of those technological developments have really allowed the business community and the profession really to do things, during the pandemic, which would have been unthinkable, right, 20 years ago. But we're also now within, we're sort of at the beginning of, blockchain technology, and, a lot of people talk about some, digital assets and that, and those issues, but the underlying technologies in terms of electronic distributive ledgers are really important as well. So, Wes, also hearing what you're saying in terms of the resources that firms have been investing in, where do we sort of see this, this new age sort of coming on, which I do really think we're on the precipice of? Where do we see that taking us in terms of audit? And I'll throw that as a jump ball to whomever would like to take it.
Yeah, so I'm happy to start the conversation. I think the market is out in front and leading. Whether it's where the market is investing, for example, in collaboration tools and techniques, but then raises good questions around security, privacy, or in other areas where more traditional structured data reporting like XBRL, which is not typically in the scope of a financial statement audit, but has now been integrated into the core financial statements. And so they're very appropriate, good questions about what is the role of the auditor, where could we set standards, where could we move forward to enhance the reliability and the consistency of technology. So, Tom, from my vantage point, the market is moving, it's consistently innovating, and we're in an innovation cycle given the disruption from COVID and the acceleration of a lot of business transformation plans. But this is exactly the time then for us to work together to make sure we understand technology, both for its promises as well as its risks, so that we address those together as a system before there's calamity. And I have confidence that we can do that.
Yeah. No, so I would agree. We do have to be sure that we are not going to set up unintended consequences with technology, for sure. I think we also kind of come full circle, because I think technology is also going to even push that issue of relevance even further. But it's going to give us the bandwidth to allow us to extend the audit beyond kind of the focus of internal controls in a good way, I believe. And so I think that we are, I think that more is coming. I think we do have to be careful. I think we do need to understand the risks and make sure we don't set up these unintended consequences. But I think we're going to have to, because either the audit, we can get so much information, access to information, and the way in which it's available, it forces, becomes irrelevant that, it's a lot easier to opine on the internal control system, or we expand things and start to opine on a broader set of issues and constructs around within a company. So I just think it's pretty exciting as to where it might go, but I think we all do have to be careful.
Jeff, do you have any thoughts?
No, ditto. I'd say the same thing, Tom. I mean, again, we are supportive of looking at new technologies like you mentioned, blockchain, distributed ledger technology. I think we've had conversations with you about some of those issues and the SEC. But we have to be, as was already said, we have to be careful when we adopt these new technologies that the end result is improving the information for investors and other capital market participants.
Sort of, it's the data that goes in and it's the data that comes out, right? That's important there. Right. Put it in a nice way. Let me shift gears for a second. Let's talk about independence, right? Because one of the important evolutions, or one of the important developments coming out of Sarbanes-Oxley were the audit independence rules. And, the SEC in the last few years, took a look at that, right? Because, there were changes in the marketplace that have happened over 20 years. Some people supported those changes very strongly. Some people were skeptical of those. I know that there was an audit. The Investor Advisory Committee at the SEC at their September meeting had a discussion around this. Wes, I think you were part of that discussion. Can you talk about maybe a little bit about what happened during that committee discussion? And I really want to talk with all three of you as to where do you see this stands right now?
Sure. Happy to, and maybe I'll just sort of share the views that I expressed in both that committee meeting, but also generally over time. That auditor independence, some see, perhaps as an obstacle. I see it as an essential source of value. It's auditor independence that enables investors to have the confidence that someone from the outside has looked at the numbers, has looked at the financial statements, has looked at the disclosures. So it's an essential underpinning to the value of the audit process. And so given its importance, then the question is, are those rules working as they're intended to work? And where has the market changed? What are the circumstances that need to be incorporated into the auditor independence rules? I think that's the core question. There's a couple of really important guardrails within the system. One is the regulatory process, the SEC, the PCB's process for administering those rules, as well as proposing changes. And Tom, to your point, there were changes proposed and vigorous debates on all sides. That's a feature, not a failure. That's a feature of our system. But then there's also the important role of independent audit committees, independent audit committee members who provide oversight of the audit relationship, and that's critical. That's one of the points that was also highlighted in the SEC Investor Advisory Committee discussion. Independent audit committees is a feature of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, reinforces the quality of dialogue and the accountability in that relationship, moving the discussion above management and directly to the board. And then the last guardrail, I guess, that I would highlight is the importance of incentives, market incentives, regulatory incentives, but the incentives for firms as well as audit committees who have a shared responsibility for auditor independence to really demonstrate and reinforce the value of audit moving forward. I think those are good guardrails in place to protect something that really is a cornerstone of a high quality audit that investors and other stakeholders have confidence in. That's how I see it, Tom.
Thanks, Wes. Jeff?
Tom, our membership approved policies put a significant focus on the independence of the external auditors and also on independent board members, as Wes noted. Those policies reflect the view that audited financial statements and including related disclosures are a critical source of information to making investment decisions. And those policies also state that our members believe that the efficiency of the global markets depends in significant part on the quality, the comparability, reliability of the information provided by audited financial statements and disclosures, and that quality, comparability, reliability of that information in turn depends in part on the quality of assurance that the independent auditor provides that management's recognition, measurement, and disclosures are free of material misstatements or omissions. One important tool, Tom, that investors as shareholders have to hold firms and companies accountable is proxy voting. More specifically, the voting by shareholders for the election or re-election of the director that chairs the audit committee, and for those directors that are members of the committee, and also shareholder voting on the ratification of the external auditor. However, for this proxy voting tool to be effective, more information is needed to help investors make informed decisions about those votes. And one source of additional information that CII and many investors have long supported was recommended by the Department of Treasury's Advisory Committee on the Auditing Profession, recommended by the PCAOB's own Investor Advisory Committee, and was discussed at the SEC's Investor Advisory Committee in December, is the recommendation to require disclosure of indicators of audit quality, or as Wes described them at the IAC meeting, transparency data points. We believe that transparency data points should be required to be disclosed, not only for each audit of a public company, but more broadly on a regional, U.S. and global firm-wide basis.
Thank you, Jeff. Kathy, I'll give you the last word.
Okay. I other than the company itself, I don't think there's anybody that is more concerned about the quality of the information and the getting to the right answer on those financial statements as the audit committees themselves. And therefore, independence of the audit committee and independence of the auditors is incredibly important. None of us want to would even allow, if we saw it and we are looking for it, undue influence over the audit firm or the auditors by company personnel. So that is independence. To me, does say quality, and on both sides, both with the internal audit, with the auditors, the audit committee, as well as the auditors. And I think we are all watching for it because it is incredibly important to get to the right answer, to make sure our internal controls are effective, and we are protecting the information for the investors and for the company and the audit committee, frankly.
Well, Kathy, Jeff, Wes, thank you very much. We could have talked a lot more. There are a lot more developments that are out there. So Julie and I may be talking. We may do another one of these sometime soon, and hopefully we can do it in person too. So with that, again, thank you. And I would like to turn our program over to Julie Bell Lindsay, the CEO of the CAQ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom, and for the panelists. I am pleased to be joined in this fireside chat in a virtual environment with Mr. Dan Gelzer, who probably doesn't need an introduction, but I will briefly introduce him. Dan was appointed by the SEC as a founding member of the PCAOB in October of 2002. He served as acting chairperson of the from October of 2009 until January of 2011. And he left the PCAOB in March of 2012. Prior to serving at the PCAOB, Dan had a very illustrious career as a general counsel of the SEC and also a partner at Baker McKenzie. So Dan, thank you for being here. I am going to jump right in because we just have a short amount of time. You were there, obviously, at the very beginning of the implementation of SOX. And I just want to ask you, what were your objectives going in to the PCAOB, and how do you feel those objectives were achieved?
Well, thanks, Julie. It's great to be part of the program, and thank you for having me. I think we had one fairly simple objective when we opened the doors of the PCAOB in January of 2003, and that was to restore confidence in auditing. A lot of time has passed since then, and maybe people don't remember all of the background, but there really was something of a crisis in confidence in auditing and financial reporting when Sarbanes-Oxley was passed. Enron had collapsed, WorldCom had collapsed, the market had dropped substantially. Congress passed the law with only one dissenting vote, which is perhaps an indication of the crisis atmosphere in those days. So I think that those of us that started the board felt that we really had an important responsibility to try and correct that lack of confidence. I mean, as to whether the board succeeded, well, I think we met that objective. And it's been suggested already, restatements peaked in the early 2000s. They've fallen to their lowest level in many years. In 2019, which is the last year I've seen numbers for SEC enforcement cases related to auditing and reporting matters, are also at a much lower level. They were about 2.5 times higher at the beginning of the 2000s than they are today. And many of the financial reporting scandals that dominate the newspapers today occur outside the United States rather than here. The PCAOB isn't completely responsible for that, but I think its inspection program is a very important component.
That's very true. And the one vote against Sarbanes-Oxley, that's a good reminder as well of the importance. Let's shift to the state of audit quality. You heard the panel discussing the evolution of the audit quality during the ongoing pandemic, COVID, as well as the important role that auditor independence plays in high quality audits. What do you see as some of the key themes in the near term for the near-term future for audit quality?
Yeah, well, of course, the business environment keeps changing, and as a result, audit quality issues keep changing. I guess I would point to 4 things currently. One would be the various consequences of what you might call the COVID revolution. We have today, I think, and probably will for the foreseeable future, a hybrid work model in auditing. Auditors had to move quite quickly to largely working remotely. I don't think that's likely to change. It raises issues for integrating new staff into an engagement team, training. I think it's put more burden on audit managers. The profession, I think, is adjusted well to the remote working environment, but it does pose challenges that I think are still being worked out. It certainly affects the way audits are performed. There have been challenges for things like inventory observation and just sort of the fundamental process of looking the client in the eye when you have questions and learning the kinds of things that can be learned on site and talking to people that you might miss in the remote working environment. Certainly client systems were also challenged as clients moved to working remotely. We didn't really see, at least so far, a great upsurge in material weaknesses or financial reporting failures as a result of the shift to remote working, but I think it's going to be important that the profession remain vigilant for those things. Sort of also under the COVID heading, we might point to what the newspapers like to call the Great Resignation. Certainly there has been turnover in the profession and generally across the business community. People are reconsidered their career options, and the talent pipeline coming into auditing, it probably isn't as broad as what we need. So I think that constellation of things are all important series of challenges. Second, the prior panel talked about technology and auditing. Technology has been certainly a positive. It's one of the things that allowed the profession to pivot quickly to remote work. But there are also training challenges, learning challenges as the audit process changes and firms adopt to digital auditing platforms. Also, as the PCAOB pointed out in a recent release, as more information becomes available, it's important for auditors to focus on both the relevance and the reliability of the information available to them. And that's kind of a change, something that hasn't been as much of a challenge before technology made so much information available. The third thing I'd point to is that firm quality control systems are, I think, in the midst of an evolution. The IAASB has adopted a new quality management standard, and the ASB and the PCAOB are in the process of doing the same thing. So firms are going to have to stop using sort of a checklist approach to quality control and more a process where they assess periodically what the actual challenges in their practice are, and making sure that they have measures in place to address those challenges. And just finally, the prior panel mentioned independence, and it's so fundamental to what the profession does and what the public's perception of the profession is that I think I would include that as a current theme also. As has been noted, the SEC made some changes in the independence rules recently, and particularly those with respect to looking at affiliates of the audit client and whether the firm has to be independent of those, allow for some measure of judgment. And I think it's going to be important that judgment be exercised carefully and cautiously. Independence is a shared responsibility between the firm and the audit committee, and I think it's important for both to keep in mind anything that could be a threat to the appearance of independence.
Very, very well said on the shared responsibility. So I'm going to shift to the PCAOB, an organization you know quite well. We currently have a one-person board at the PCAOB, and I just have to ask you, what advice would you have for incoming board members? Where do you think the PCAOB has done a great job? Where do you think they could do better given their really key oversight role of public company auditors?
Well, it kind of goes back a little to the first question. I think the PCAOB has done three big things right. And I think its inspection program has been very effective in improving audit quality and causing firms to devote resources and thought to audit quality in a way that they weren't before Sarbanes-Oxley. There were some foundational decisions made about inspections in the early days. I mean, things like the fact that Part 1 audit deficiencies would include situations where the financial statements weren't misstated, but the inspection staff felt that the engagement team hadn't gathered sufficient evidence to support its opinion. I think those have really driven audit quality to a new level. I think the ICFR audit is something that the board has gotten right. I mean, again, it was a sort of a costly and challenging process at the beginning, but I think the attention that the inspection staff has paid to ICFR audits and the pressure that that's put on both firms and companies has really improved the quality of controls and the quality of financial reporting. Third, I think they got the international inspection program largely right. I mean, here too, there were questions at the beginning about whether the board should rely on inspections performed by foreign regulators or perform its own inspections of non-US firms that participate in US audits. I think by taking largely the direct approach, the board has exposed some unevenness in audit quality around the world and done a lot to improve that. And maybe the fact that that China stayed outside the system, and there have been a number of financial reporting failures coming out of China's illustration of that. As to what ought to be on the agenda for the new board, well, we could probably discuss that for a couple of hours at least. I'll just tick off 5 things that I think the new board ought to consider when it's appointed. And first, I think the PCAOB needs to be more transparent about what its policy goals and standard setting objectives are. There's been a lot written about the fact that it disbanded 2 advisory groups that had operated for a number of years. And I think the public has just been left a bit more in the dark about what the board's priorities and objectives are. And I hope that'll be corrected, because confidence in auditing and in the profession depends a lot on confidence in the PCAOB, and that depends on transparency about its work. Second, I think the PCAOB needs to do something to sort of revitalize its standard setting program. When we started the board, we envisioned that while we adopted the existing AICPA auditing standards, over time we would go through all of those standards and modernize them or determine whether revisions are necessary. That was done to some degree, but in the last few years, the board really hasn't done a lot of standard setting in core auditing areas. And in particular, I don't think it's done as much as it needs to in terms of updating the standards to address the technology revolution in auditing. Third, I think the board ought to think about still more transparency with respect to inspection reports. The prior board did take some steps in that direction, but I think today it's hard for readers to get a sense of how serious or how far-reaching particular Part 1 audit deficiencies are. I think this might be something that could be integrated with audit quality indicators that the prior panel referred to, and perhaps by including those in the inspection report, readers might get a better idea of how well firms are doing, rather than simply leaving readers to count the number of Part 1 deficiencies and make comparative judgments based on that. Fourth, I'm going to mention this already, but I think it's important that the PCAOB modernize its quality control standards. I know it's put out a concept release on that subject, but quality control is obviously fundamental to what the firms do, and I think the PCAOB needs to move ahead with that project. And fifth, perhaps less popular with the profession, but I think the PCAOB needs to ask Congress to make its enforcement process more transparent. Today, PCAOB enforcement cases are non-public until they're resolved. I think that it hampers the PCAOB's enforcement efforts. It makes the SEC more reluctant to let the board pursue cases which the commission might also pursue itself, and it just prevents the public from having a good picture of what the PCAOB is doing. So I hope that'll change.
Thanks very much for that. Well, we have just about a minute left, so not too heavy a question to ask you in a minute, but you heard the prior panel talk about kind of the relevancy of the audit, how the audit has evolved since SOX and where it could go from here. Where do you think the future of public company auditing is and could go?
Well, as the prior panel suggested, I think auditors are likely to be asked to take on responsibility for a broader range of information. I mean, we've seen it actually already. You could view the opinion on the internal controls as a new type of communication by auditors, and the addition of critical audit matter reporting to the audit report. But some of the areas where I think we're likely to see consideration of expanding the auditor's responsibilities in the next few years would include non-GAAP measures and critical performance indicators. These are more and more important to investors today in their decision making, and I think auditors are likely to be asked to play a bigger role. Certainly, the biggest issue in financial reporting or public company disclosure today is climate change and ESG reporting generally. I think the CAQ did a study recently that showed that about 29% of S&P 500 companies are getting some type of assurance with respect to their sustainability information. I think that's undoubtedly going to grow and may well become a regulatory requirement. And I think it's also possible that auditors may get involved with respect to company disclosures, with respect to cybersecurity and cyber risk preparedness. That's it's a key issue for both the economy as a whole and for investors in particular companies, and there may be a role for auditors to play. So just, in broad terms, assurance with respect to the financial statements, I think, is always going to be the foundation of auditing. But I think you're going to see the profession's responsibilities rapidly broaden to other areas over the next few years.
Dan, thank you so much for taking time to join us today. And I just have to mention, as a CEO of the CAQ, we have a lot of resources on our website relating to some of those issues that Dan was talking about the future of audit. I want to thank all of you for participating today. I want to thank the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Tom for being with us today, as well as all of our speakers, Wes, Kelly, Kathy, and Jeff, and Dan. Thank you for being with us today. Hope you've enjoyed our discussions, and we look forward to continuing these discussions. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.